Every morning, a lackey stood outside the bedroom door of the most powerful woman in Russia and struck it 3 times with a silver mallet. That was how the day began for Empress Alexandra at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Not a polite tap on the door or a whispered good morning, but a mallet made of silver, slammed against carved wood, the sound echoing through a corridor lined with gilded frames and cold marble. It was a tradition that stretched all the way back to Catherine the Great, more than 100 years earlier. And every single morning, without fail, some unlucky servant had to walk up to that door and perform this bizarre little ritual while the rest of the palace held its breath. The year was 1900. Alexandra was 28 years old. She had 4 daughters under the age of 5. She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England, born Princess Alex of Hesse in a small German duchy, and she now lived inside a building that contained 1,500 rooms, 1,886 doors, 117 staircases, and nearly 2,000 windows looking out over the frozen Neva River. The Winter Palace was not a home. It was a small city made of stone and gold, and somewhere inside it, in a suite of rooms tucked into the northwest corner of the 2nd floor, the Empress of Russia woke up to face another day that she almost certainly did not want. That might sound dramatic, but by 1900, Alexandra already hated court life. She hated the formal receptions. She hated the gossip. She hated the way the Russian aristocracy stared at her and whispered behind their fans. And on this particular winter morning, with frost crawling up the palace windows and the sky still dark over the Neva embankment, she had to get up anyway, because she was the Empress. And the empire did not wait. To understand what her morning actually looked like, you have to understand the palace itself. The Winter Palace in 1900 was not the museum you can visit today in St. Petersburg. It was a working imperial residence, the seat of Romanov power, a building designed to remind every person who entered it that the Russian Empire was the largest nation on earth, and it was enormous. The principal facade stretched over 200 meters long and stood 30 meters high. It covered an area of more than 233,000 square meters. The architect Alexander Krasovsky had recently redesigned the imperial apartments for Nicholas and Alexandra when they moved in back in December of 1895. And what he created was strange by royal standards. He lowered many of the vaulted ceilings to make the rooms feel more intimate. He mixed Art Nouveau details with English Gothic touches. The result was a suite of rooms that were, by Winter Palace standards, small, narrow, even a little dark. Nicholas had a study so cramped that visitors sometimes commented on it. The whole apartment felt more like a well-furnished London townhouse than the residence of an emperor who ruled over 1/6 of the Earth's land surface and more than 125 million people. That was Alexandra's doing. She wanted it that way. She had grown up under the care of English nannies at the court of Queen Victoria, spending long stretches at Balmoral and the Isle of Wight. English was the language she always spoke and wrote to Nicholas. An observer once noted that the Empress always thought of herself as an Englishwoman, and when it came time to decorate her own rooms, she filled them with the things an upper-class Englishwoman of the 1890s would have loved. Chintz fabrics on the furniture, framed photographs covering every surface, knickknacks on every shelf, and flowers wherever she could fit them, especially lilacs, which were her favorite. The Russian aristocracy thought it was tasteless. They expected a Romanov empress to live in splendor, surrounded by fine art and the latest French furnishings. Alexandra gave them floral wallpaper and family photos. Petersburg society never forgave her for it. So picture this. It is a winter morning, sometime around 1900. The sky outside is iron gray. The temperature along the Neva embankment has dropped well below freezing, and the river itself is a solid sheet of ice stretching toward the Peter and Paul fortress on the opposite bank. Inside the Winter Palace, the corridors are already stirring. Servants have been awake for hours, stoking the enormous porcelain stoves that heated the building, polishing the parquet floors, preparing the ceremonial rooms for whatever official business the day would bring. The palace employed hundreds of people just to keep it running. The kitchen alone had about 150 workers, and 10 of those cooked exclusively for the imperial family. The servants' quarters were so vast that, according to one widely repeated account, a former servant and his family once moved back into the roof of the palace without anyone noticing. They were only discovered because of the smell of manure from the cow they had smuggled in with them for fresh milk. That is the kind of building this was. A place so large that you could hide a cow in it and nobody would know for weeks. Upstairs, in the private apartments, the lackey performs his duty. 3 strikes of the silver mallet on the bedroom door. The tradition is absurd when you think about it. It survived for over a century simply because nobody wanted to be the person who changed the way the Empress of Russia was woken up. Traditions like that had a way of outlasting the people who started them. Catherine the Great had been dead for over 100 years, but her mallet was still banging on doors every morning. Nicholas was usually awake long before the knock. He was an early riser by nature, and he would often slip out of bed before the mallet landed, pulling on his robe and crossing the corridor to his own bathroom and dressing room. But Alexandra was different. She had trouble sleeping. She was up for large parts of the night, lying in the darkness of their shared bedroom, which she had decorated in a shiny chintz print with pink ribbons and green wreaths on a white background. She thought it looked like a bright English garden. A former director of the Palace Museum later said the fabric gave the room a funereal feel, with the beds arranged in front of the icon wall like a bier. That was certainly not what Alexandra had in mind. But the disconnect between how she saw herself and how others saw her was a pattern that ran through her entire life. During those sleepless nights, she would nibble on fruit and crackers that servants set out for her on a side table. She may have had chronic pain from sciatica, a condition she had suffered since at least her early 20s, before she was even married. She also had headaches, fatigue, and what later accounts describe as cardiac problems. Whether all of these ailments were physical, psychological, or some mix of both has been debated for over a century. What is clear is that by 1900, Alexandra was frequently unwell, and the nights were often the worst. So when that mallet struck the door, she was often already awake, just lying there, staring at the ceiling of a room she had designed to remind her of somewhere else. The first thing Alexandra did after rising was pray. This was not a quick, casual prayer. Alexandra was intensely, deeply religious, in a way that even the devout members of the Russian court found unusual. She had converted from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy before her wedding in 1894, and she did not treat the conversion lightly. Where most of the Russian educated class had grown somewhat indifferent to formal religion by the end of the 19th century, Alexandra went the other direction entirely. She embraced orthodoxy with everything she had. She spent hours on her knees before the icons in her private rooms, praying with an intensity that bordered on what contemporaries described as a morbid condition. Her rooms were filled with icons. Religious images hung on the walls, stood on shelves, sat propped on tables next to the family photographs and the lilac arrangements. The icon wall in the bedroom was one of the most prominent features of the space. Gilded frames containing painted saints looking down on the twin beds and the English chintz. For Alexandra, these morning prayers were not optional, and they were not brief. They were the foundation of her entire day, and she approached them with a seriousness that sometimes made the people around her uncomfortable. She would kneel for long stretches, crossing herself in the orthodox manner, murmuring prayers in the Russian she had worked hard to learn. Members of the House of Hesse, her birth family, had been prone to religious intensity for generations. Her sister, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, would eventually leave court life entirely and become a nun, founding a religious order in Moscow. In Alexandra, this same tendency found its fullest expression inside the private rooms of the most opulent palace in Europe. The combination was jarring to visitors. English furniture, German sensibility, Russian icons, and a level of devotion that belonged in a monastery, not in a room where the Empress of all the Russias ate crackers in the dark and worried about things she could not control. After prayer came bathing. The Empress had a private bathroom installed adjacent to the bedroom, and by the standards of 1900, it was thoroughly modern. It had carpeted flooring, a fountain-style bathtub, and an intricate chandelier overhead. It was a room designed for comfort, which was consistent with everything else Alexandra did in her personal spaces. She bathed, and then she moved to the dressing room, where her clothes were already waiting for her. This is where the machinery of the imperial household became visible. Every morning, Alexandra's maids had her outfit laid out and ready before she arrived. The maids had their own private access to the dressing room through an ashwood staircase that led down from a mezzanine level where the Empress's wardrobe was stored and prepared. They came and went through a back entrance connected to the bathroom, which meant Alexandra almost never saw them arrive or leave. The whole operation was designed to be invisible. Like clockwork, the clothes would simply appear at the proper time, and the maids were expected to do all of it as quietly as possible. The Grand Duchesses used a version of this same internal staircase, which ran from the nurseries above through the maids' mezzanine and past a second bathroom down to their mother's rooms. So while Alexandra was getting dressed, she could hear the footsteps of her little daughters overhead, the sound of their tiny feet on the floorboards, sometimes the faint notes of a piano being practiced badly. She could hear them, but she could not see them yet. The palace kept everyone in separate compartments, connected by hidden passages and service stairs that the family rarely used themselves. But here is the thing that made Alexandra different from the empresses who came before her. She dressed herself. She did not sit on a chair while attendants layered her in silk and buttoned her into corsets. She selected her clothes for the week in advance, based on the activities she had on her calendar, and then she met with her maids to go over the selection. Each day, she would receive a written summary of what was planned for the following day, and she would make final instructions for her wardrobe. It was organized, it was methodical, and then she put the clothes on herself. She changed multiple times a day. In the morning, she dressed casually. For luncheon and tea, she wore something more formal. For dinner, even when she and Nicholas dined alone with no guests, she put on expensive evening dresses and set them off with magnificent jewels. Pearls were her favorite. She preferred their soft color over more expensive stones, and she had a particular love for pale aquamarines and blue topazes. The evening transformation was dramatic, but the morning version of Alexandra was understated by imperial standards. A woman getting dressed in a quiet room, alone, choosing comfort over spectacle. With her clothes on, Alexandra made her way to breakfast. In the imperial household, the first meal of the day was served in the private apartments, not in any grand dining hall. It was coffee, tea, or cocoa, depending on personal preference, along with bread and butter. If you wanted ham and eggs, you could ask for them. Alexandra loved Russian kolaches, a type of bread that looks like a padlock. The palace's head baker, referred to by the staff as Sir Yermolayev, was considered a master of his craft. He prepared exceptional cookies, tiny kolaches the size of a small coin, milky rolls, and puff pastry buns. Alexandra ate simply. She had become a vegetarian at some point, and she ate little in general, though she never lost weight. She drank tea the way she had learned in England, following the tradition of afternoon tea that her grandmother, Queen Victoria, had practiced. The 5 o'clock tea was sacred to her, but the morning tea came first, and it was quieter, more private. Just her, the bread, and the day ahead. And then came the bills. Because Alexandra did something that no previous empress had apparently bothered to do, she checked the kitchen accounts. The court cook operated like a restaurant owner. For ordinary breakfasts, not holiday meals, he was paid 75 kopecks per person. For lunches, 1 ruble per diner. Fruits and wines were tracked separately under a different person. Alexandra went through these bills carefully, making sure the cook was not adding breakfasts and lunches that were never actually served. The palace staff found this baffling. They had never seen an empress counting kopecks. First, they called her the governess. Then, they started calling her the cook. She also darned her own children's stockings, which caused endless gossip and what one account described as malicious ridicule among the household staff. This tells you something important about Alexandra that the stories about jewels and palaces tend to obscure. She was frugal. She was domestic in a way that confused and irritated the people who worked for her because it crossed invisible class boundaries that Russian court society considered sacred. An empress was supposed to be above the household accounts. She was supposed to let the servants handle the stockings. Alexandra did not care about those rules. She cared about running her household the way her English grandmother had taught her, with attention to detail and a strong suspicion that someone, somewhere, was probably overcharging. After breakfast, the morning shifted toward correspondence. Alexandra was a prolific letter writer, and she had a writing desk positioned at an angle in front of the window of her private study. She wrote in English, mostly, letters to family members abroad, to her grandmother Victoria until the old Queen's death in January of 1901, to her sister Elizabeth in Moscow, and later, increasingly, to Nicholas when he was away. Her letters reveal someone quite different from the cold, aloof image that Russian society had constructed. She was emotional, passionate, deeply affectionate, and surprisingly funny in private. She had a strong sense of humor that almost nobody outside her immediate family ever saw, because the shyness that had gripped her since childhood made public warmth nearly impossible. She also read, constantly. Books were everywhere in her rooms, stacked on side tables, piled next to her writing desk, lining the shelves of her private library. She read religious texts, novels, poetry, and she had a habit of copying out passages from books that moved her, particularly writings about marriage and family life. She filled notebooks with excerpts that matched her own experience, creating a kind of private anthology of thoughts on love, duty, and faith that nobody outside her inner circle ever saw. She and Nicholas shared a love of music, especially opera. His diary entries from 1900 record them attending performances at the Mariinsky Theatre, seeing Chaliapin sing the role of Mephistopheles in Faust, watching a production of Cyrano de Bergerac at the Mikhailovsky Theatre that Nicholas described as extraordinarily beautiful, and sitting together through their favorite opera, Tristan and Isolde by Wagner, enjoying what he called its beautiful music. These were the private pleasures of two people who, whatever else history would say about them, genuinely loved each other's company. But by mid-morning, the private hours were over and the official schedule began. Nicholas would already be deep into his own routine by then. He typically took a morning walk alone on the Neva embankment, without security, a habit that would have been unthinkable for his grandfather Alexander II, who had been assassinated on the streets of St. Petersburg in 1881. After his walk, Nicholas attended his daily report meeting with ministers, a session that started at 10 in the morning and ran on every single day, including Orthodox holidays and state celebrations. The emperor worked constantly, and so, in her own way, did the empress. Alexandra's afternoons were consumed by audiences, school visits, and meetings about her various charitable projects. She preferred to see people individually rather than in groups, because one-on-one meetings made her feel less overwhelmed. Her receptions took up enormous amounts of time precisely because of this preference. Each person was seen separately, which meant a full schedule could stretch for hours. She gave audiences, she reviewed requests, she dealt with the endless paperwork of patronage, and she did all of it while battling the headaches and the fatigue and the leg pain that never quite went away. The mornings, then, were the only hours that belonged to her. The time between the silver mallet and the first audience was the closest thing Alexandra had to freedom inside the Winter Palace. Prayer, a bath, getting dressed by herself, bread and tea, checking the kitchen bills, writing letters in English, reading a novel by the window while the winter light crept across the frozen city outside. And yet, even in those private hours, there was a tension that you can feel in every account of her daily life. The Winter Palace made Alexandra miserable in ways that went beyond shyness. She found the public access to the exterior of the building genuinely distressing. Ordinary citizens could walk right up to the palace walls, and they did. They stared at the windows of the private apartments, trying to catch a glimpse of the imperial family. Alexandra hated this. In 1896, just a year after moving in, she had a garden created in a previously paved area on the western side of the palace, specifically so her children would have somewhere to play without being watched by strangers. She wanted walls, she wanted hedges, she wanted to not be looked at. That desire for seclusion was already defining her public reputation by 1900, and it was not a good reputation. The Russian people saw a cold, distant German woman who refused to show her face, who skipped public appearances, who hid inside her rooms surrounded by icons and English furniture. They did not know about the sciatica. They did not know about the sleepless nights. They did not know that she was painfully shy, that she had been emotionally scarred by losing her mother and a younger sister to diphtheria when she was only 6 years old, that she had been raised by her grandmother in an atmosphere one contemporary described as strained and severe, and that she had wrapped herself in a protective cocoon from childhood. All they saw was an empress who would not come out. The court was even harsher. Petersburg high society expected a Romanov empress to live semi-publicly in splendid rooms, to entertain with grace, to set the tone for the social season. Alexandra did none of that. She retreated to her private apartments. She gave way to her mother-in-law, the Dowager Empress Maria, at public events, which was Maria's right by custom but which the court still held against Alexandra. The whispers about her were constant, and they were cruel. She had no taste. She had no charm. She was too German, too English, too religious, too strange. What nobody in that court understood, or perhaps what nobody cared to understand, was that Alexandra's mornings told a different story. Those few hours before the official day began revealed a woman who was organized, attentive, deeply loving toward her husband and children, devoted to her faith, and determined to manage her household with integrity, even when the staff mocked her for it. She was not cold. She was guarded. There is a difference, though the Russian court of 1900 was not interested in making that distinction. Russia in 1900 was an empire running on ceremony and appearances. The Tsar ruled over nearly 9 million square miles of territory. His word was law. His wife was expected to be the glittering center of court social life, a visible symbol of imperial grace. And instead, the court got a shy woman from a minor German duchy who checked the kitchen bills and darned socks. The mismatch was so severe that it became a kind of running joke among the aristocracy. And then it became something worse than a joke. It became contempt. And those mornings were numbered. In 1900, Alexandra did not yet know that she would bear a son, Alexei, in 1904, and that the boy would be born with hemophilia, a bleeding disorder she had unknowingly carried as a descendant of Queen Victoria. She did not yet know that the desperate search for a cure for her son would lead her to a Siberian mystic named Grigory Rasputin. She did not yet know that in January of 1905, troops would fire on peaceful protesters right outside the Winter Palace on what became known as Bloody Sunday, and that after that day, she and Nicholas would abandon this building for good, retreating to the smaller and more private Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo. She did not yet know that revolution was coming, or that it would consume everything, the palace, the empire, and eventually her own life, and the lives of her entire family in a basement in Yekaterinburg in July of 1918. All of that was still ahead. On this morning in 1900, the mallet struck the door 3 times. The Empress opened her eyes. She prayed in front of her icons. She walked to the bathroom with the chandelier and the fountain tub. She put on a simple morning dress by herself, while her maids moved silently through the hidden staircase behind the walls. She ate a kalak with her tea and checked the kitchen accounts. She sat at her writing desk and wrote a letter in English to someone she loved. And outside the frost-covered windows of the Winter Palace, the city of St. Petersburg carried on as if none of it mattered. 18 years later, it would all be gone. The palace, the mallet, the staircase, the kalaches, the icons, the letters, the lilacs, the woman herself, all of it wiped away so completely that for decades, the only trace of Alexandra's mornings that survived was the chintz wallpaper peeling off the walls of empty rooms that nobody was allowed to enter. Her final diary entry, written on July 16, 1918, the day before she was killed, read simply, "Grey morning, later lovely sunshine. She played cards. She had tea." And then the page for the next day was blank. The morning routine of an empress in a palace with 1,500 rooms. It sounds like a fairy tale, but the woman eating bread alone in a small room checking the bills, writing letters to her family, praying on her knees for something she could not name. That is not a fairy tale. That is someone trying to hold her life together inside a building that was too big, a role that was too heavy, and a century that was about to tear everything apart. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and leave a comment telling me which details surprised you most. More videos like this are coming every week.